delayed. Everything got pushed back a little bit, but I think it was well worth it for what you got to listen to. Are we ready?
Yep,
Yeah.
we're ready.
All right. See if I can get this going. All right, so thank you all for being here. I am so pleased and honored to be able to share my work at the Shepard Symposium. My name is Wendy Perkins, and this is Telling My Story Because It Needs to Be Told, a photoethnography of Denver-based sex workers. So, let's talk about whores, and streetwalkers, and escorts, lot lizards, prostitutes. Any other names anyone can think of? Shout it out. Anything? Hookers? Lady of the night. A little more distinction on that one. Yes. Hoochie mama. There we go. These are all titles and names that we use for sex workers. How many of you know or have met a sex worker? Some? Yeah? For those of you who did not raise your hand, chances are you've probably met a sex worker. You just didn't know it because they didn't look like this. This is what we think a sex worker should look like. And why are these the images that come to mind? Yeah? Media. Media is the key word. Media knows that we are a society of instant gratification. We like to have information and entertainment and everything right now at our fingertips. In most cases, people make a 3-second window choice of what to look at and what to peruse. Images of women doing, okay. Can we get out of this thing? Can I have a little help? Something popped up that I'm supposed to do Java. It completely took out my...
Let me see. Say skip, maybe. There we go.
And now, how do we get back into where we were at? Are we going?
Are you
It's
just trying to get to the next slide?
Oh, it's timed.
Oh.
Sorry. Sorry,
That's
everyone.
okay. I'm not a PC guy. I don't recognize anything here.
Little technical difficulty with the computer.
So if I exit the show, can we get back into it?
All right. All right, we're going to try this again. All right, hopefully will work. Okay, thank you. So media knows that most consumers have a 3-second window in which to make decisions of what they're going to look at. And everyday pictures of women just doing normal activities are just not attractive and exciting. But there definitely are sex workers who do dress like this because they're dressing for the job. A judge wears robes, a surgeon has scrubs. But this is not a definition of the entire group of people. Because these are the type of things the type of images that we tend to use, what is happening is that as a society, we are using stigmatized and disenfranchised group of people for personal entertainment. Projects such as mine, hopefully, will remind us that these groups of people are just that. They are people, and they should not be dehumanized. So this is what a sex worker looks like. The stories of the women in this project came together through observations, interviews, and photographs. I successfully spent 3-day periods with 7 women during the summer of 2015. Some of the women were still on the streets, some in a recovery program, and some of them no longer in the business. I was able to connect with these women through Dr. Susan Dewey, who is a professor here at the University of Wyoming in the Gender and Women's Studies program, and through Streets Hope, which is a Denver-based program. It's a 1-year in-house facility that tries to help women who want to get out of the business. During my time with these women, I asked them just to do what they would normally do. I didn't ask them to be something different or do anything different than what they would normally do in a routine. And if they were using, I asked them not to stop. This is part of who they are, and I didn't want them to change on my behalf. And so my goal was immersion of spending time with these women and just being a part of their lives, following them around and simply letting them be who they are. We spent time watching movies and shopping, going to amusement parks, museums, anything that anyone else would be doing on almost any other day. There was one particular day that I did help a woman try to figure out which police station her daughter had been taken to after she was arrested for shoplifting. There was another day that was mainly spent in the ER with a woman because her brother has seizures quite often. The written content of the project came mainly from recorded interviews with the women. And I asked them questions about themselves, such as, what did you want to be when you grow up? What are your hobbies? What are some of your favorite childhood memories? What are your goals? I didn't ask them about being a sex worker. I asked them about themselves. The narrative did eventually come out in their stories about their life as a sex worker. Through this process of being with the women, there were some commonalities that came forward, particularly with the 7 women in the project, but also the other women that I had contact with. The first is childhood molestation. The molestation usually occurs by family, friends, and peers, and this is an early definition of their self-worth. These women are learning at a very young age that their value in life is their sexuality. Sex is an asset. Here's a quote from Ernestine. They walked in as I was pulling up my pants, coming from the back room, and my uncle was back there. I was coming out as they were walking in, and I was zipping my little shorts up. Here's another quote from Ernestine. Sex is a big thing to me. I'm addicted to not so much to money, like I told you. I'm addicted to taking stuff from men more than anything because my uncle did it to me. He took something from me that can never be replaced. I get to be in control because I got what they want, what they need. Roxanne was an example of an early determination of self-worth. At the age of 12, she became sexually involved with a 19-year-old. She was an overweight young woman and suddenly was getting a lot of attention from men. This value, this self-worth, stayed with her into adulthood. Here's a quote from Roxanne. When I met my first pimp, I never had attention from people, really. I was really big. At that point in time, I was probably 300 plus pounds, and people were now paying attention to me. They liked me, and I was good at making money. That's what I thought I was going to be for the rest of my life. I was going to be a hoe for life. The second commonality I found was mental illness. The mental illnesses may have existed prior to the women getting into the business or may have manifested after, but these women, of course, did not have comprehensive health care as in their childhood. And so whether or not they had mental illnesses that made them predisposed to being a sex worker, or if those illnesses manifested after getting into the business, it's hard to determine, honestly. Here's an observation from Anita. It's hard for me to remember all that has happened in my life. I struggle with personality disorder, bipolar disorder, and schizophrenia. Here's an observation from Jessica. I am bipolar, severe PTSD, OCD tendencies, and have borderline split personality disorder. I am artistic, a mother, a believer, and a leader. The third commonality I found was choice. And the women will all say that at some point they made a choice to get into a car, to take money, to meet at a hotel, but they felt they had no options. It was a matter of survival, and they knew that they had at least one asset that they could survive on. And for some of these women, this was simply a natural progression of life. They grew up in households of gangs, drugs, and prostitution. As a woman, this was just the natural progression of what you do. Here's a quote from Laura Lee. This guy told me, "You're a woman, you can make money." He kind of gave me a rundown of how things worked, and I watched. About an hour later, I got into my first vehicle. It was really odd and weird. My circumstance got me into that. But I'll tell you what, though, when I found crack cocaine, that stuff just numbed me from all the kinds of pain I ever felt. Here's a quote from Brandy. "I was having a lot of sex because that is what I thought love was. I didn't like it, but I thought he did, so he would love me." Here's a quote from Anita. "Come walk a mile in my shoes. Come stay and do a day of my day. Do what I have to do to survive. See how I hurt? See where my pain comes from." The time I spent with these 7 women was eye-opening, and to say the least, their stories are both fascinating and heartbreaking. Laura Lee is supposed to be a success story of a former sex worker. She successfully completed the program through Streets Hope and worked for 2 years for the program after her graduation. Laura Lee would not consider her story a success. She struggles to find affordable housing, jobs that will take a chance on someone with very few traditional work skills and a criminal record, and she's constantly aware of the stigma attached to her former work. Working on the streets was sometimes easier. Shortly before I spent my time with her, Laura Lee had gotten a job at Red Robin, I believe, and found that one of her coworkers was one of her former tricks. And it was such an uncomfortable situation for her that she only ended up working there for 2 weeks. But those are the type of things that these women face. I asked Laura Lee, "What do you think about stereotyping sex workers? How do you know what she's been through? How are you going to sit there and point your finger at her? It's not a life they choose. It's not like you wake up one day and say, 'I think I want to be a drug addict and prostitute.' Yeah, let's roll, baby." Some people need to have their eyes opened to more things, and some people need to close their mouth to more things. They really do. It's all the human race. You're going to have good, bad, right, wrong, indifferent, whatever, with any subject, anywhere. Before people open their mouth about a stigma, what they think is politically correct and incorrect, or why they think this and why they think that, I think they should just open up their ears and their heart and look and see what's going on around them. Anita's story demonstrates the difficulties of older former sex workers trying to reintegrate into mainstream society. Ageism and problems with her mental and physical health are insurmountable obstacles for her. She currently lives in a very run-down Section 8 housing unit, so low-income housing. She has a tiny one-bedroom apartment where she, her brother, a young woman, and the woman's boyfriend all live together. So Anita sleeps in the one bed. Her brother sleeps on the couch. He's a military vet and suffers from frequent seizures. The young woman and her boyfriend sleep on a blow-up mattress in the living room. The young woman is an active sex worker, and her boyfriend is a drug dealer. They all support the household. Anita receives support through government programs. Her brother has military benefits, and the young woman and her boyfriend both bring in money and goods. An example of that is while I was there, the young woman said, "Okay, it's time for us to make our list. What do we want?" So they started talking about meat, about pork chops and steaks and ground meat. Well, this young woman has a standing trick, a butcher that she meets every other week, and his payment is in meat. And so as a household, they together decide what the payment is. Society would say that this is dysfunctional, but for them, this is survival, and it is a household. Ernestine is an example of how mental illness can trap women in the business. She was diagnosed with early dementia. She did not like how the medications made her feel, and so she self-medicated with alcohol. In a traditional setting, the dementia made Ernestine's options quite limited. In sex work, she still gets to make her own choices and in some ways has more freedom, although the lifestyle is to a point unbearable. To get out of the business, her mental illness is a big obstacle because in a conventional recovery program, which is usually working on a shoestring budget and very few people to support it, mental illnesses of any intense level, they're just not equipped to deal with. Unfortunately for Ernestine, fortunately for Ernestine, a couple of months after my time with her, she did get into Streets Hope. Unfortunately for Ernestine, she was hit by a drunk driver then a few months after that and was killed. The drunk driver was arrested and had a long history of alcohol-related citations and had spent time and should have obviously never been on the streets. But that was also the end of Ernestine. So what's the takeaway for this project? In my opinion, it is to listen to the advice of Laurel Lee. Stop judging others by a label. Understand the person, know the person before making a judgment. Don't let society or media dictate how others should be regarded, and stop dehumanizing all those that you may consider the others. The product of this whole project is an exhibit that contains text depicting the women's lives and photos from my time with them. A small portion of it is out in the hallway. There's at least 2 of the seven women who are out there. The full exhibit is available online through the UW libraries. There is a QR code out there for that, and at the end of the PowerPoint is the URL. I would like to use the remaining time that we have for questions, because I feel that oftentimes these are the important. We don't necessarily need a mic. I can repeat the questions. Would anybody like to speak up? It's a free-for-all.
Did any of them say how they stayed safe while they did their jobs?
So the question is if the women talked about how they stayed safe while they were out on the streets. Yes, there was some discussion about that. The women do tend to find groups, friends, a small community in which to do that. It doesn't guarantee their safety, but it's the survival skills that these women develop from being out on the streets is amazing. Being extremely aware of their surroundings, of the people who are around them and what's going on, more so than any of us on an average day ever pay attention to. But that doesn't mean that they were ever exempt from the violence. I believe Ernestine had a story of waking up one day next to a dumpster and having all of her teeth gone. She had blacked out and had been beaten so badly that in the end she lost all of her teeth. More questions? Yes?
Did most of them did any of them have extra jobs, or was that their full-time job?
So the question is whether or not the women had other jobs besides being a sex worker. Yes, that they do. Some of the women do, and they do try. The difficulties that they face is if they at all have any kind of criminal record, that makes employment difficult. As we've heard with some of the other speakers here, living off of minimum wage is extraordinarily difficult. And depending on what level of hierarchy you're in at the sex industry, you can easily make $2,000 or $3,000 in a day or two that it would take you a month and a half to make in a low-income job. And so in some ways, although the life was ugly, survival and being able to make more money in that aspect was easier than trying to be quote-unquote normal. Question?
Thank you for repeating the questions, by the way. What's your sense of how if prostitution was legalized, how that would change for better or for worse, how it would change their work?
Legalization is a big concern or a big topic in many ways. What tends to happen is it's the women who are punished for being prostitutes, which is interesting because sex is sex. Sex is not going away. It's here. It's a biological function. It is something that makes us mentally and physically feel better. And obviously there are those out there who are looking for sex, and those are the people who tend to not be punished, but the women are punished because they are doing, quote unquote, a job. We assume that if there were legalization, that there would be a better level of protection for the women, even though that's not necessarily true. There is some concern that things would be pushed even further out to the fringe into more dangerous areas, maybe less populated areas of sex if there were suddenly rules and regulations attached to it. Because maybe now if certain things weren't allowed but someone was still wanting something, there would be a woman who would eventually provide it, but she would be pushed to the fringe and have less protection. So that's a big conversation that there's no real answer to. There's pros and cons to it on both ways. Yes?
So, just out of curiosity, when you went in to start this, what kind of mindset did you have at first? Did you have any biases? Were you looking for something in particular?
So the question was, when I went into the project, if I was looking for anything in particular or had any particular or any biases, personal biases. Going into it, I simply wanted to be with them as people, because that's who they are. They're people. They're just women. We use these titles and these names, and suddenly we have all these images and words that are attached and descriptions that are attached to them, but they're just women. That's all they are. And that was what I wanted, was to spend time with them. My own personal biases, I think I may have had some, but I made a very concerted effort to just look at them as just women, as just people. And whether their behavior may have been something I agreed with or didn't agree with, it really didn't matter, because I wasn't there to judge them. I was simply there to be with them and to say, this is who you are, and I'm not going to question the stories that they told me. It's quite possible that if I were to take the whole narrative of some of these women and try to actually put it together, that it wouldn't probably quite make sense. But who am I to question that, to say, well, I don't think that that's really true, or that's your life? Yes?
How open were they to talking about this kind of stuff to you? Because it seemed like you just kind of came in there and asked these questions and they didn't even know you.
That is correct. So the question is how open the women were to me approaching them and asking these questions. The upper hand I had on that was Dr. Susan Dewey, because she has been doing research with sex workers in the sex industry now for quite some time, both domestically and internationally. And so most of these women had some sort of contact with her previously, and so she was my validity. She vouched for me as the fact that of what I was coming in, and she had explained to them beforehand what I was wanting to do. And there were some women who said no. I mean, I had actually been trying to get with more women. That was a bad choice of words, get with more women. But I was trying to spend more time with more women, but it was the 7 that said yes. And so, but they also felt that they were being ambassadors, because for them, they all agree that it's not a happy or glamorous life. It's an ugly life. And if they can at all share stories and hopefully keep others from making those choices or feeling that that's their only option, they felt grateful to be able to share that. Is there a question over here?
In regards to the 7 women who were a part of that industry, not only the physicality of the woman waking up with no teeth, but in regards to like safe sex and protection, how did those women incorporate that into their lives and not contract diseases?
So the question is about safe sex, being a prostitute, basically. And for the women who were in the project, they did talk about that, and they had to weigh the options. So oftentimes you would have a John who would say, I'll give you a much greater amount of money to go bareback. So that means if you're low on food or you're getting dope sick or something, and this is a nice little jackpot, you have to weigh the possibility of, great, I'm going to have a short-term little fun situation here, or possibly I could catch something, which means I may no longer be able to work. I may no longer actually be able to make money as a prostitute if I get a disease. And so most of the women talked about safe sex was important to them, but on occasion they did take those chances if someone offered money talks and if someone offered something that was hard to turn down.
Would decriminalizing sex work work better than legalization to make it safe?
So the question is decriminalization rather than legalization, and that's still another conversation that's going on quite a bit. And it goes back to what I said before, that it's often the women who end up being the criminals and not the Johns. So I would assume that decriminalization might even be better than legalization, simply because then both sides of the negotiation, and we're talking about an instance where, in this instance, we're talking more between men and women, even though we have to remember that the sex industry is between everyone. It's not just that. In this particular instance, these are mainly female sex workers with male clients. We would have to assume that decriminalization may help protect the women a little bit more, because they might be more willing to actually come forward when they have been abused by Johns. And I think that's one of the biggest things that happens that we don't think about, is these women are abused over and over again, but they are too fearful to report that because they will end up going to jail, and the Johns usually won't. So that may be the better option in that situation. I think I am out of time. I know we got pushed back, but I believe I've hit my 30 minutes. I thank all of you for being here, and please do go out and look at the panels in the hallway, and please look at the exhibit online, and I very much appreciate you being here. Thank you.